Today, I really want to unpack this idea of making decisions and making decisions from a place of fear, which Scripture tells us that we are not given a spirit of fear, but of one of power. Or if we're making our decisions from a place of faith, where we're putting our trust and our belief and even admitting our unbelief in certain circumstances to say, you know what, these circumstances are not going to drive.
Welcome to the Christ Centered Stewardship podcast with your hosts, Maria Casillas and Nino. Christ Centered Stewardship is a ministry of new money habits designed to equip believers to steward everything God has given them, including their time, talent, and treasure in ways that bring Him honor, glory, and praise. You can join our growing community on Facebook and submit your questions to podcast at newmoneyhabits.com. Now, to begin today's episode, here is Maria Casillas and Nino.
Well, hello there, Maria. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking.
I have a question to kind of get us started, just rhetorical in nature. And it really focuses on whether or not we are operating from a place of fear or if we're operating from a place of faith. And today I really want to unpack this idea of making decisions and making decisions from a place of fear, which Scripture tells us that we are not given a spirit of fear, but of one of power. Or if we're making our decisions from a place of faith, where we're putting our trust and our belief and even admitting our unbelief in certain circumstances to say, you know what, these circumstances are not going to drive how I make this decision. I'm going to operate from faith instead of fear. So that's what I want to get into today. You up
All
for
right.
it?
Let's do it.
So when I think about this, and I think about making decisions specifically around anything in life, it can be something as simple as what to do today. And that's one I've been struggling with in this season, but I'll unpack that in a moment. But for me, I know over the last handful of years, probably 10, 15 years, there have been these decisions that I needed to make around employment that really fear could have driven the decisions I was making, but ultimately faith won out, and it has made for a beautiful testimony at this point. It starts back in 2008. I was working for an organization that I wasn't planning on staying at very long, and I had all sorts of plans to leave, and God just made it very clear, don't leave, just stick it out. Stop putting your faith in your friends to get you the job opportunities you're looking for, and trust me. So I did, and it took a couple of months, but things really unfolded in a spectacular way that I could never have imagined. And it kind of launched this career that was weird, because 4 years later, in 2012, all of a sudden I was laid off because the entire satellite office was closed. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I wasn't afraid. I was curious, but not afraid. And a couple of days later, I get a call from my vice president at the time, and she's all like, Nino, us letting you go has no reflection on you and what we think of your work and that sort of thing. In fact, we're going to open up a position. We're going to allow that position to work from home. We would love for you to consider that position. And I was like, yes, where do I sign up? Fast forward 4 years later, they laid me off again. Big budget cuts. The entire team, the team of 23 got cut down to like 5. So wow. It was pretty devastating. And I remember colleagues reaching out to me during that period of time because so many of us were affected. And I kept sharing with them. I said, guys, look, I'm surprised, but I'm not afraid. I know that God will provide. He has provided in the past. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So I don't know how. I don't know when. I just know he will. And again, within a matter of weeks, I got a call, and it was a former colleague who had left earlier, and she was like, hey, I know that you got laid off. There's an opportunity. Would you be interested in checking out this opportunity? I was like, yeah, let's do it. And then again in 2020, I was actually back with that same organization. So I had returned to the same organization like 4 times. This time it was a little bit rougher. They did a bunch of layoffs. I was not included. They wanted to keep me around, but totally, completely changed my job responsibilities, my role. And I decided that I needed to leave. This was my turn to break up with them rather than them breaking up with me. And again, it took a lot of faith to do that. I could not have done that because I was afraid, right? I mean, you're walking away from employment willingly. Like, what? But it took faith to do that. And so here I am all these years later to say not once, not twice, not 3 times, but over and over and over again, as I step out in faith and I put my trust in God and his plan and his provision, things always seem to work out.
I like that. I also want to point out that that didn't mean that you just sit back and relax and have the Lord send you some piles of money.
That's right.
You still cooperated with his will, and you did that in faith. Again, not knowing how, not knowing when, how that provision was going to take place. But you were willing to cooperate with that and do some work as well. And so I think that's one place that sometimes we get a little bit stuck, like, the Lord's going to provide, so I don't have to do anything. Or vice versa. I got to do it all. Right. And that's not the case. And I think that that's where some of us myself included, get tripped up, is where do we see that line? And when I hear, the idea of faith over circumstance, for example, one of the words missing there is control. And I don't know what you think about this, but it's like when we try to take control of situations rather than giving that control back to the Lord, that's when I screw things up.
Yep.
It really is like, okay, I'm the one who needs to control this. No, I definitely know I'm not. So that is one of the things I have to constantly say. It's actually one of my favorite prayerful mantras is, Jesus, I trust in you. And it's more of a reminder to my soul than it is an actual prayer sometimes. I have to remind myself, trust in him. It's a daily thing that I have to do. Sometimes it's more than a daily thing. Let's get real. It's sometimes a minute thing.
It's a moment by moment.
The moment.
Absolutely.
So, this is not something that I have conquered. It's not something that I have perfected. It is something that I work on all the time. But that little prayerful mantra is this reminder, like, Jesus, I need to trust in you. And I want to trust in you. And so I'm just going to say, I trust in you. I'm going to say it over and over and over until it becomes truth for me.
Right. Yeah, and as I mentioned a moment ago, it's still a season I've had to wrestle with this past year. This past year, the provisions looked very different. He still provided. Mm-hmm. I could still put food on the table for the family. I could still keep a roof over our head. And it looked different. And if I'm being honest, he provided in a way that I was like, really, like this way? That this is what it's going to look like? Can we get back kind of to the old way? Would that be okay? And what I've had to wrestle with in this season is I know he's been faithful in the past. And again, like you, I have to remind myself he's the same yesterday, today, and always. So it might look different, but what I have to recognize is that my circumstances shouldn't drive whether I'm being faithful or not. I know he's being faithful, but am I living in faith, or am I going to allow fear to creep up and allow me to get off course, right? The Lord has me on a path. I'm not exactly sure what that path is, but I know it's his. And if I operate from a place of fear, I could easily get off that path, get sidetracked. He'll always bring me back, but I don't want to waste time between now and then. I don't want to go off into the wilderness for 40 years, wander around just to come back and be like, I just wasted 40 years of my life wandering around in the wilderness. I'd rather, so the thing I've been on my knees in faithful prayer is just, Lord, where do you want me? What do you want me doing? When do you want me doing it? You know, and in this season, I just feel like he is working on my patience and my trust in him, in that it's like, can you be patient and wait? His timing is always perfect, right? So what I'm hearing is my timing is perfect from him. Can you wait on it? And it's like, I mean, I can. I don't want to, but I can, but only by his strength.
So, Nino, for the sake of our listeners, so that they can apply this understanding to their own lives, can you give an example of a provision that looks different than what you had either had in the past, or that you had kind of hoped for? You were saying, I know you always provide. Sometimes it looks different than what I had hoped for. Can we do it a different way? Could you give an example of one of those for us, please?
Yeah. So historically, he's always provided through either like W-2 employment. In 2016, I started doing some independent freelance work. And then, of course, in 2019, you, Mike, and I started doing New Money Habits together, and I had been doing some financial coaching before that. So there's an entrepreneurship element to it. There's a 1099 independent freelancer element to it. There's W-2 work that has shown up. But this past year, what was really different is none of those three, and even a combination of those three, weren't enough. I actually had to dip into my retirement savings, which, look, if I'm being, and I just said it, if I'm being honest, I'm like, really? Like, this is the way we're going to go? But it allowed me to free up time to do other things that has definitely been part of his kingdom and his plan. So it's like, okay, look, I was able to keep food on the table and a roof over my head because you have provided. It is not the way I would have saw it happening. But part of that is like, throughout the year, I've toyed with, do I just kind of put a halt on everything else and just go find a job? Like anything at all. That is just like a consistent and predictable income. But that would be me operating out of fear. It has actually taken more faith to say, and I've applied to some things, and I've done some things where I'm like, maybe I need to go in a different direction completely. And he has shut every one of those doors. Like, no, I need you to be patient because I'm doing something here. And in this season of patience, what I have come to realize is it's me, right? He has to work on me. I'm not ready for whatever comes next. And look, that doesn't mean I think some big windfall is coming, right? This is not prosperity gospel type stuff. This is real life. Do you trust me? I'm your heavenly Father. I take care of the birds and the flowers. Of course, I'm going to take care of you. Just be patient. Be patient. it's going to be worth it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that that example. I wasn't sure where you were going to go with that, but I know that that's kind of a vulnerable thing to be able to talk about on here. So thank you for that. Some other ways that I've seen provision come through, and you actually talked about like the income side of things. And there have been times when the income doesn't always match the outgo. And it's like, oh, okay, so where will this be provided? What will this look like? And it just warms my heart to know that there are all of these little reminders along the way. Like you might get a scholarship. I mean, I'm speaking as a mom right now.
Yep.
My children, they went through a private high school that was costly, and it was one that, quite frankly, we probably couldn't afford if you really looked at the numbers. And there was a specific year that I went and helped some other friends of ours from church. Actually, they had opened up an insurance firm, and they're like, we would really use your help just getting this launched. And so I went and helped them, and of course they paid me to do that. Well, that amount of money combined with what my husband brought in that particular year put us just over, like literally just over the threshold that would have allowed us to have a decent scholarship for my daughters. And I remember thinking, well, that feels like punishment. Like, I went and I helped somebody and I did this work and I got paid, which was helpful in the moment. But man, like now it cost me to go and help these individuals. When all was said and done, this truly just miraculous thing happened where they ended up giving us more in scholarship money that year than they had in years past. Still don't know why. We still don't have any clue as to how it all flushed out. But I know that was God. I knew it was. There was no doubt in my mind. And I see little things like that, those provisions where it might not be something physically that we are, receiving, but it could be something where we're not having to put out that amount in a certain way. So that was just another small example of how when we just say, Lord, in fact, I do this weird thing. You're going to think I'm so crazy, but hey, you know what? Maybe our listeners will start doing this. You know how we have to change our passwords like every 15 minutes? I actually use my passwords as reminders for myself. Now, granted, sometimes I also just save the password and forget what I chose. But in the moment, I always choose something that is just a reminder for myself. So like one might be thrive in 2025, just to remind myself of the thing. Well, when I was setting up all of the stuff for that particular school, like I won't go into all the details, but there's a special account that you have. And when I set up that account for funding that school, it was, I think it was trust in him. It was all caps for him. And then the number 4 and this, and that was my password, trust in him for this. And when things like that happen, I'm like, yes, like I am trusting and it's working and I couldn't do it better. Like there's that reminder, like we can't do it any better. So
I love that. I might have to steal that. I have never thought to like make passwords like little communication with the Lord for different things. That's awesome. It did remind me that there was a provision, a completely different type of provision that came earlier last year. It was, when I was in 6th grade, so I was about 11 years old, I was playing basketball at school and the ball hit me in the forehead and it made me like bite down and one of my front teeth had chipped and whatnot. Wow. I had been living with that same crown or whatever was on my front tooth for all these years later. Well, I'm at the dentist and they're cleaning my tooth and they're flossing and that crown or that cap or whatever just pops off, right?
Did you stay? Oh my gosh, what did you do? You broke my tooth. You didn't mess with them. I would have
No,
messed with them.
I didn't. No, I didn't. But so the dentist comes in. He's all like, "Hey, since we did it, we're gonna fix it at no cost." And so there, right? Like to your point, there wasn't an outgo for having to replace that. And what's interesting is here we are about a year later, and it is so much better. I used to be able to kind of like feel the cap with my tongue. It's smooth, it is seamless, and I didn't have to pay for it because they popped it
Beautiful.
out, they took care of it. And so exactly, provisions can come in all sorts of different ways.
And to that point, I think it helps us get into the mindset if we can recognize those little blessings along the way. And we've talked about gratitude before, but just being able to see and have our eyes opened to those little miracles along the way, it really helps us to realize that A, we're not in control, and B, circumstances are just that. They're just circumstances, and they're not going to be forever. Some of them we have some control over. I actually do share this, and if I may, the idea of our own self-created circumstances, because there are a lot of times when people think, well, circumstances are what they are, and I have no control over them. And as somebody who studied behavioral psychology, I can just tell you that when we think a certain way and feel a certain way and act a certain way, there's always some sort of consequence that comes after that. It can feel positive, it can feel negative, but oftentimes that consequence then becomes our circumstance for the next thing. And so in that sense, we do have a little bit of say in what some of those circumstances are. There are acts of nature that we don't control. There are other things like that. But if we're looking at just on our individual level, oftentimes there is some sort of compounding effect, some sort of rippling thing that had happened that we might have actually started because of one of our choices and one of our behaviors. And so we can start to shift those circumstances a little bit, which is helpful. But again, that's only us cooperating with God's will. That is not us taking control over everything.
I like it. A good reminder, and you said it earlier, being reminded daily, but actually being reminded like moment by moment that we're not in control. We can only there are certain things that we can control. It's usually limited to how we respond and how we show up in a situation. But I appreciate the constant reminders, constant, gentle reminders to just live in a space of faith. We were talking before we hit record about the man who comes to Jesus and says, if you're able to, heal my son. And Jesus says, if I'm able to. And he's like, well, I do believe, but help me with my unbelief. Right? That part, that last little part, that it's like, for whatever reason, we're holding on to a little bit of doubt or a little bit of, I'm just not sure if it will happen this time. So, Lord, help me with my unbelief.
Yeah. It's a good thing. I remind myself that also. It's another one of my favorite prayers. Just, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. And the human logic side of that says, how that doesn't even make any sense. But I think it's because we're not just, we are spiritual beings, right? I mean, we have bodies and we have spirits. And so we live in this world, but we're not of this world. And this, it's one of those mysteries that logic is not always the thing. So we have to constantly be saying, yes, I do believe, I want to believe, and I know intuitively I do. And yet there's this undercurrent of fear. It really is what it's like, there's not knowing, is this the time? Like you had said, is this the time that you're going to say yes? Because we also know that our prayer, or the answers to our prayer, is not always yes.
Correct.
It's not always yes now. And so I think there's that human element of just not knowing, So we have to, that's why we're always trying to align our will with God's will so that we can know what that is a little bit better.
Yeah. The way I've often heard it said is God answers prayer with either yes, no, or not now.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to, one of my other kind of daily prayers is, as you say, aligning to God's will. Like, Lord, I have this desire, right? I love confessing what it is that I want. And especially if I can recognize that it's fleshly, meaning if I know, like, I want to be angry at somebody, I know that's of the flesh. So I'm all like, Lord, I'll even grab my flesh and I'm like, the flesh right now wants to be angry with this person. I want the spirit to defeat the flesh. I want the flesh to have to bow down and coattail to the spirit, right? So, but sometimes it's not necessarily a bad desire, but it's like, Lord, if this desire that I have to want to do X, Y, or Z, if it's not what you want for me, would you help to squash that? Like, just remove it from my heart, from my mind, so that I don't desire it any longer. And I think sometimes that one's a little bit harder, right? Because it might have something to do with I'm involved in a number of different things, from like an employment, entrepreneur, and even from like a volunteer perspective. And there are things that it's like, this is how I want to spend time, right? I want to be over here. And I heard it said this way, like, something may be good, it doesn't mean it's godly. That's like, oof, right? Like, so I have this desire and I want to spend time this way. And it's good, but maybe it's not what you want, Lord. So would you help to align my will to yours? Would you help me to suppress and eliminate my selfish ambitions and desires for more godly, heavenly desires?
Well, and I'll just add one more thing on there. It might even be godly, but not for you. It's not yours.
Yep.
You know, it might be his will, but not for you. And so when we try to take that, we're actually taking it away from somebody else. We're taking away that opportunity for somebody else to cooperate with his will for them. And so, it just came to mind. I thought I'd throw it out there for you.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Well, I'm really glad that we had an opportunity to really kind of get to the core of what some of all of this really means. But I'm curious, are there any questions out there for us as coaches from anybody who's curious about how to steward their resources well, how to actually put faith over circumstances for their own lives?
Yeah. In fact, we had an anonymous member post to one of the groups recently, and the post reads this: I need help with my situation and figuring out what to do here. I'm 32 years old, making about $120,000 a year. I have about $100,000 in debt, not including my mortgage right now. Then she goes on to break it down: $20,000 on one personal loan, another $5,000 on a second personal loan, $6,000 in credit card debt, and $69,000 in student loans. And here's where the question comes in. I'm considering filing for bankruptcy, but not sure if that's a good plan. My mortgage is $2,200 a month, no car note. I just feel really terrible about stewarding my finances well. So looking for any advice on how to lower this debt and get rid of it.
And this individual actually used the word stewarding, like you're not throwing that in there?
I am not augmenting that, and I'm not throwing that in there.
That's
She's
awesome.
the one who said, I really feel terrible about stewarding my finances well.
Okay. I'm only a little bit surprised by that because it seems more like an archaic, word. It's like,
right.
but people are using it. I think that's really exciting.
It is really exciting.
All right. Well, I mean, as you were reading that, my heart kind of sunk a little bit when she said she's considering filing for bankruptcy. Not that I have a judgment about that specifically, but that just seems like a a cry for desperate, like a desperate cry. Like I just like I'm despairing, and bankruptcy seems like one of those last ditch efforts. But if I remember your numbers correctly, I don't know that it's actually going to bring her the peace that she thinks it will. I mean, even if it were to wipe everything out the way that she thinks it would. But didn't you say like 69,000 of it was student loans along
Yes.
that line? Okay.
Yes.
So I admittedly have not been following some of the new things in the news with, what administrations are doing and such, but nothing's changed about student loans not going into bankruptcy, right?
Yeah. As
Okay.
far as I'm aware, you are correct.
Okay. All right.
You
So
still cannot
70%.
bankrupt. Yeah.
Okay. So about 69% of her debt would not even be wiped away in the bankruptcy. So we'd be filing bankruptcy to wash away about $31,000.
That's correct.
Okay. And she makes 120.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So logically, and that's where we start with our human mind is, looking at numbers and logic. It seems as though that wouldn't be the most logical decision. I would imagine, just based on numbers. But I want to talk about circumstances before we make decisions. Did she say like where she lives, whether she has a family, nothing like that? You read
No,
the entire thing. Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. I'm gonna guess as you said she's female, so I'm gonna guess as a
32-year-old female,
woman.
yep.
Okay, I'm gonna guess as a woman that if she didn't mention family, that she probably doesn't have kids to consider. That would be my guess. I'm guessing this person is single. She's making $120,000 a year, which is a decent income, but I don't know where she lives. It's like here where I am, well, where we are. You're also here in Arizona. $120,000 a year would be a really decent income.
Yes.
I don't know, somewhere like California, you might be able to do that on, not minimum wage, but it probably, like, maybe you could do that really easily. I don't really know. I don't know enough about that. So,
But I think, like, even let's set aside cost of living in her area, because when we look at like just her mortgage, right? She communicated her mortgage. She does not have a car note, and then this other stuff is personal loans, credit cards, student loans.
yeah.
When you outside of taxes, in maybe how much gasoline is costing her, we know what her housing is costing her in comparison to her overall, at least her gross pay, right? Not her net pay, but still, even using that gross calculation, that $2,200 a month compared to $10,000 pre-tax a month. So even if after taxes it's like $8,000, $2,200 out of $8,000 is still about that 25%, which is like, it goes to at least say her mortgage isn't out of whack. Her housing isn't kind of keeping things overly tight. That's well within a good ratio. So if we kind of based it off of that, I think to your point, the idea here is the circumstance seems to be debt. And if she's comparing the ratio of debt to income, like I have $100,000 in debt, I make $120,000 a year, that probably sounds scary. That probably drums up fear. But when we start to take a look and kind of peel back the layers here, maybe it's not as scary as it seems.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective.
Yeah. So what I would do is, if I were sitting down with her, is just start having a conversation about like what do these numbers really represent to you in terms of, are you afraid you're not able to make minimum monthly payments? Are you afraid that these things will jeopardize your ability to hold on to your home? Like what is it about this debt? How do you feel? Right? I want to kind of get into what does this debt make you feel? And when we can turn that faith, when we can turn that fear into faith, right? So I'm going to put aside the fear. I'm not going to be afraid of my debt. I'm going to have faith that God has provided for me here a pretty strong income, pretty good resources. Now, I've made some decisions. I've taken out a personal loan or two. I've racked up a little bit of credit card debt, and I went and I got an education. I made decisions. I now have to live with the consequences of those decisions. And I would want to like really draw on, you want to steward the resources that God has provided to you in a way that brings him honor, glory, and praise. That's awesome. Let's operate from how can we do that? Does bankruptcy in this situation honor God? Or does a little bit of discipline and a little bit of I'm going to keep things tight for a season so that I can repay my obligations, does that honor God?
Mm-hmm. And I think that she is open to that only because the last statement says, I just feel really terrible about stewarding my finances well. So looking for any advice on how to lower this debt and get rid of it. So it almost seems as though she wants to lower the debt, get rid of it, but she's been told by whether it's somebody specific or groups of people or the internet that bankruptcy is the best way to do that. And so I almost think she doesn't really want, it just says that she was considering filing for bankruptcy, but I don't even think she wants to.
Yeah.
If she wanted to, she would have just done this already.
Right.
She wouldn't have been going out looking for, some of this other stuff. But those two statements put next to each other really say to me that she actually doesn't want to do that. And that's why I really like the insight that you had, that just the very number, $100,000, probably sounds so high and so overwhelming that it becomes scary. And but when you peel back those layers and you share information, details, like $69,000 of that will have to be paid off anyway,
Yep.
then it probably starts to lessen that fear monster, or at least give her some truth around it. There are other ways to do this. And she's still young. I think that's the other thing too. We hear, oh, well, you haven't done retirement. Like you're really far behind. And so there's so much around that, we can get into fear over that as well. So
Maria, you just touched on something that I think is really important. And it's this idea that the more information we have, right? So here, this poster might have had it in her mind, or she's being told, hey, bankruptcy, but she's obviously seeking other avenues. Mm-hmm. And so in order to make an informed decision, we have to first gather the information. And so here, I think the more we actually look at what are the actual numbers, what's the budget look like? Are you operating in a surplus every month or a deficit? And if you have a surplus, how are we managing that surplus so that we can start to lower and eventually get rid of this debt? I think that's so important. And so I'm glad she's seeking wise counsel. I want to applaud her for that, right? In the counsel of many, but also who and where you get that counsel from is important. But and so I think that might be part of the takeaway here is for anybody else who is not the poster, but who is also thinking, boy, I am just overwhelmed and afraid of my financial situation. I'd encourage you to seek wise counsel. Seek counsel from those that you trust to give you different perspective. Not a worldly perspective of let's just run away from our obligations and the mess that we've made, but how can I faithfully work through the past decisions I've made to get myself into a financial place that I can feel less stress, anxiety, and fear over.
Lovely.
So I think that will take us to our weekly challenge for our listeners. I think in line with everything we just talked about, I'd say the weekly challenge is, before making decisions this week, ask the Lord, what honors you? So that's the challenge. Before you make a decision this week, ask, Lord, what decision would honor you?
Challenge accepted, sir.
Awesome.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Christ Centered Stewardship Podcast. Follow us on your favorite social media platform for more encouragement and support. And until next time, may the Lord keep you in perfect peace as you set your sight on Jesus.